Let's talk to Chris Gunness, who's a former Chief Spokesperson for UNWRA, which of course has been the primary UN mechanism of delivering humanitarian food supplies to Gaza. Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning. This has obviously upended decades of US foreign policy assumption. What impact do you think it will have in the region, and in particular potentially on the very delicate ceasefire, which is of course only just holding?
Lewis, before I answer that, can I just say very quickly, I've been phoned up many times this morning by friends and people in Gaza who are distraught, and they say, we will go back to our homes, particularly even in the north, which are frankly craters where they and their children are reliant on food kitchens, where they face mass starvation, disease and death. They'd rather do that than face homelessness on the streets of Cairo, in Egypt, in Jordan. So let's make that very clear. I think we have to see this in terms of the context. Now, Raphael Lemkin, who coined the word genocide, was very clear that genocide is a continuum. And from the Palestinian perspective, that began arguably in 1948 with the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their lands. The next layer of context, I think, in which we need to see this Trump announcement is 1967 and the occupation of Palestinian land. The next layer is 2007 and the imposition of the blockade on Gaza. And of course, we saw Hamas rising up against these layers of context, if you like, an attack which, of course, was a terrorist attack, which the world has rightly condemned. But that is the context. In terms of the implication, I think that the basis of peace in the Middle East has been resolutions 242 and 338, in which we find the concept of land for peace. And this is the concept, by the way, which underpins international law. It's the piece of law that says to Putin, you cannot simply acquire large chunks of Ukraine by force. It's the piece of law that says to China, you can't just take over, parts of Taiwan or Taiwan by force. So if we throw that away, if we go with this Trump plan, then we're throwing away the international rule of law. You're saying to NATO countries, well, if Russia invades you, that's part of the new order. So it's disastrous in terms of the international order. And closer to home for Israelis and Palestinians, I think it throws into serious jeopardy phase 2 of the peace plan. If this peace plan results in 2.3 million Palestinians being forcibly ejected from Gaza and their homes being developed by Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, who, of course, as one of your listeners has rightly noted, are both New York property developers. If that's where this peace plan is going, then of course no one is going to move into phase 2. So it brings into doubt, I think, very seriously, whether the hostages, whether the Israelis will be released, and of course the Palestinians.
You think that there's a possibility that Hamas respond to this by saying, we're not going to continue with the next stage because where will it go? Where will it get us? It will just get us to a position where Palestinians are forcibly removed from their homes.
I think some in Hamas will definitely be saying that. They'll be saying, well, what is the point? And by the way, if this is the opening salvo of Trump's deal of the century, this was going to be the big deal for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, then, okay, it's a very daring opening gambit. It's very Trumpian. But frankly, I think if you ask, the Saudis, for example, who are going to be key to this deal of the century, what they think of this, one would hope that at least privately they would reject this because... Sorry, you speak.
Sorry, I was going to say, Chris, do you think we should take this seriously? And then as a sort of secondary question to that, do you think that people in the region, and in particular Palestinians, will take it seriously?
I mean, there's one level at which it has to be taken seriously because this is the American president and this is Benjamin Netanyahu, the main ally of America in the Middle East. But I mean, having said, yes, we have to take it seriously in terms of face value, I think we have to look beyond what it looks like at face value and unpack what's actually going on. And I think what is actually going on is this is part of Trump's smashing the whole architecture up, whether it's, the American economic model, whether it's foreign relations, whether it's peace in the Middle East. That's what he is doing, and he's going to try and rebuild it. So in that, to that extent, I think we have to take it seriously. And I think Israelis and Palestinians have no choice but to take it seriously. But I think at the end of the day, if you're Palestinian, you think, well, there's 4 years of Trump, and one assumes that after 4 years, let's pray that there's some kind of normality that returns to international relations. And if you're Hamas, they are millennials. for them, Gaza will be there in 1,000 years' time. Who knows what the White House or Israel will look like in 1,000 years' time? That's their mindset. So, we need to think about how they are absorbing this news today, because they are the people who really matter in this.
It is clear, isn't it, in terms of, if we let's take it on face value, as you say, central to this would be Trump saying that neighbouring countries, including Jordan and Egypt and others, would take those Palestinians forcibly displaced from Gaza. Now, that is not something, obviously, those countries have been willing to do hitherto. It is certainly not during the Gaza war, at least. And that is something they've rejected today. That's just not on the table, is it?
No, and let's not forget that Jordan already has 2 million Palestinians living there, and they have destabilized that country in the past, or so many Jordanians would phrase it. And that is a real concern for Jordan. And it's not just an issue you can throw billions at. You can't just throw billions at Jordan and say, use this to deal with the Palestinians, build them homes, accommodate them. It's much more complex than that. And those complexities, I think, in terms of the situation within Jordan, are not grasped by President Trump. And I think the same is true of Egypt. I think, the Muslim Brotherhood is widely seen as being that organization which spawned Hamas. And I think that many in Egypt see this not just as an issue of foreign relations. They see it as a matter of internal security. And what the last thing that Egyptian security needs is an angry, displaced population coming over from Gaza. And some would say that the Egyptian government would fall if this were to happen. So it's potentially hugely destabilizing. And I really think it would be interesting for you to find out, talking to Jordanian officials and Egyptian officials, how much preparation, how much talk went on between Cairo and Washington and Amman, the Jordanian capital, and Washington before this announcement was made, because I would suggest that very little forward planning was done. And I think that although we've heard these ideas floated before, Trump has said before he wants Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who's a big businessman, to come in and develop beachfront property in Gaza. Of course, the Israeli settler movement are licking their lips too, because they'd join in. But I wonder to the extent to which there's been any form of consultation with America's so-called allies in the Middle East.
If they were, again, let's take it at face value, Trump is suggesting that America would own the Gaza Strip. That would imply American soldiers being deployed. To be absolutely clear, this would be happening on the basis of what authority? It certainly wouldn't be happening on the basis of the United Nations.
Yeah, it is completely unlawful. There is no basis in international law which would allow any of this to happen. The expulsion of an entire people from their lands, American property developers going in. It's just beyond international law. And I don't think any serious lawyer, either in Washington or in any government department anywhere in the world, is going to take this at all seriously. As I say, this would be to throw away the international rule of law and to open the floodgates for any Putin-type dictator simply to march into any land they desire and just take it over. So I really think that if this does move much further, we're going to see attempts to throw Israel out of the United Nations General Assembly, just as apartheid South Africa, which of course similarly just ripped up the rule book and wouldn't listen to anyone, just as they were expelled also.
Just finally, Chris, one, let's leave aside the particulars. Trump is right about one thing, right, which is that he's coming at it and saying the status quo does not work. It has not worked. And that clearly radical thinking is necessary if we are to achieve peace in the Middle East. He's right about that, isn't he?
He is, but what he's already done, and Ben Gvir and other far-right ministers in Israel are saying, well, let's expel them from the West Bank as well. So, if what you're saying were correct, and we do need to throw away the rule book, and something more moderate and more sane and more rules-based was to come into its place, that would be fine. But what we are already seeing is far-right ministers in Israel saying, great, we've got a green light from Washington to kick the Palestinians, 2.3 million, out of Gaza. Let's kick several million out of the West Bank also, and we'll take that over for Israeli settlements. So, yes, let's throw away the rule book. I can see this, the logic, because nothing has worked very well, but replacing it with something even more radical, even more giving red meat to the Israeli far right, I think that is a recipe for further conflict. It means that Israel is destined not to live in security, in a state of security, constantly to be under the threat of terrorist attacks. And it means that Palestinians will not have the dignity and the self-determination that all peoples have according to international law and according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's what we need to come back to.
Chris Gunness there, former chief spokesperson for UNWRA, the humanitarian UN aid organisation which works in Gaza.